Hello, everyone. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I am the Education Director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee. I am so excited to be with you today as we discuss bagels. You know, today is Giving Tuesday. It's all about dough. It's all about bread. And we're going to spin that into a bagel for you. And in thinking about this time of year, I have to give credit to my wonderful intern, Emma, who came up with this idea that said, you know what, I bet people would be really interested in knowing a little bit more about bagels and where they come from and how they ended up doing this. And she did a lot of this research. So hats off to Emma. And hats off to all of the volunteers who really make the museum run and help us ensure that we can bring great product to the community. So the bagel, it's one of those, you know, it's almost a stand-in for Jewish culture in some way. And it's been expanded to its kind of lesser known roots to kind of a national icon. And you can get them all over the world at this point. Let's go and talk a little bit about what that means. So in the 14th century, pretzels were being moved from Germany to Poland, and there is a movement that pretzels go from being, you know, the pretzel shape that we know to being something in Polish known as obwarzhanek. Obwarzhanek. I'm not going to credit my my pronunciation here. It's probably pretty suspect, but this obwarzhanek was a round pastry. It was solid like a pretzel, but it was a little bit more bready. And it is credited to becoming popularized when this particular Queen Jadwiga, starts to eat this bread for Lent. It becomes, you know, very popular all throughout Poland. Now, for Jews, this has a different thing. And actually, one of the reasons why they say that it has this, it's also supposed to be credited, obwarzhanek and bagels become involved into bagels as that supposedly in recognition of a Austrian victory over the Turks, and it was in specific celebration of the king at that time, who was a horseman, and so they create a pastry, or they say that this obwarzhanek becomes a bagel because of this looks like a stirrup, and the word bugle or something like that in Polish is a round thing that this guy is credited as saying, okay, this guy loved horses so much, so we'll create a bread dish that looks like a stirrup. It's unclear if that's actually true, but bagels become kind of the specific premise of Jewish bakers in the Middle Ages, as Jewish bakers are forbidden from using commercial ovens. They're forbidden from baking, so they have to come up with a way around that. So instead of baking, they boil. And the boiling is one of those key processes in bagel making until kind of the modern era, that they're boiled and then baked. And that this is a way around those laws. That anti-Semitic laws, actually, the ones against baking go away, but there still is a sense that the clergy are saying avoid Jewish foodstuffs. And so the bagel really becomes this kind of very specifically Jewish food at that point. I will say also that they became linked, and they're first sold on the street like this guy is selling, but then they also become linked with kind of a bakery culture, that instead they become a way of surreptitiously taking political action. You go and you have a bagel, and it's going to be a little bit less suspect than having a meeting on the street. In the way that cafe culture in, say, Paris or Vienna really becomes the thing that becomes this political connection. In Poland, there's a bakery culture, and specifically a culture around eating a bagel, that you're going to go have this bagel and talk about whatever those big political questions. They come primarily with Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, and they come and they start establishing themselves within New York City as this kind of commercial process. And for the most part, the people who are eating them in this early time are other Jews. And they become this mainstay of Jewish neighborhoods, and then they become kind of a New York type cuisine. It's not until the 1970s that bagels really come into a kind of a national consciousness. And it's interesting, there are a couple of things that are kind of connected to that. One of those things is the fact that there's a sense of eating more ethnic foods in general, and the bagel becomes part of that. But there's also this sense that nationally, Lender's Bagel Company, which becomes known as Lender's New York Bagels, although they were previously, they're from New Haven, Connecticut. They're not actually, had started figuring out a way to freeze their bagels. Now, initially, this is a huge secret as they're commercially freezing. You know, they're making 600 bagels a day and they're freezing 400 and selling outside of their kind of New Haven, Connecticut area and to further afield in Connecticut, but they can't let anyone know that the bagels are frozen because then they're no longer fresh. So at first, they are really trying to hide the fact that these are frozen bagels. But as time goes on, as the original founder of Lender's dies and his son takes over, he realizes that this is an opportunity to expand to a nationwide market. And they do. They start this creation of frozen bagels, and it becomes the kind of bigger national introduction to bagels. In many cities, there were baby bagel shops, but this meant that bagels could be in small towns all over the country. Lender's bagels are bought in 1982 by Kraft Foods, and Kraft Foods owns Philadelphia cream cheese. So when they buy Lender's, they decide that there's going to be a wedding between these two objects. The wedding between Lender's bagels and Philadelphia cream cheese. The bagel is the groom, the cream cheese is the bride, and this is going to be a happy marriage. But it does lead to lots of people then having access and the ability to sample a bagel who had previously not known what a bagel was. This would then beg the question of, is this really a bagel? Ed Levine is a food blogger, and this was in an article in the New York Times. He says, a bagel is round bread made of simple yet elegant ingredients: high gluten flour, salt, water, yeast, and malt. The dough is boiled, then baked, and the result should be a rich caramel color. It should not be pale and blonde. A bagel should weigh 4 ounces or less and should make a slight cracking sound when you bite into it instead of a whoosh. A bagel should be eaten warm and ideally should be consumed no more than 4 or 5 hours old. And ideally should be no more than 4 or 5 hours old when consumed. All else is not a bagel. So if you think about the many, many bagels, including those Lender's bagels, all else is not a bagel. This would not fit Ed Levine's description. There is an ongoing debate about bagels and water. And many people will say that New York bagels are so good because of the water. And according to scientists who've tested this out, it's not. There is a sense that maybe the water could be that a harder water toughens the gluten in the dough, and New York water is particularly high in magnesium and calcium, so maybe this makes the dough a little bit stronger as opposed to softer water, which makes it goopier. Maybe that's it. This one chef feels like the dough really needs to be sitting for a while, and the sense of a real bagel, at least historically, was in order to be a real bagel, it needed to be boiled, and it would sit in a solution of water and malt between 30 seconds and 3 minutes. And that's what creates the bagel, that idea of the boiling. And the boiling actually provides, it makes for a very different sort of texture than most other breads. In modern production, most of these kitchens are not boiling their bagels. They're using steam-injected ovens. So they're getting that sense of the water in the process, but they're not having it, submerged in water and malt in that timing. When you don't have the boiling, the bagels become a little bit lighter. They have a thinner crust than the boiled bagel does. So there's a difference there. You can ask all of your bagel makers, how they're making their bagel and find out if they're boiling or if they're steam injecting. And purists would probably say that boiling is the only way to make the bagel. But For all the New Yorkers out there watching, it's not actually the water. They've done tests on this. Bagel can be found all over the world. You can find bagel places in Rwanda, in Kenya, in Mexico, in Sweden, and so many different toppings, including on the bagel itself, everything from like Parmesan and cheese to honey and wheat. And then, of course, you think of the thing that's ubiquitous now. Everything bagels were always a very popular topping. And now you can get just the topping of everything bagels at the store and just take that flavor profile into everything else you do. Of course, we want to hear from you how you take your bagels, what's exciting to you about bagels, where your favorite bagel shop is. Tell us all of this stuff. We want to hear what are your bagel secrets. And one of my docents has just said she's just on her way to Einstein's. I wonder why. So thank you all for sharing this moment, hopefully a tasty moment for you. As always, I want to thank our generous supporter, Robin Cohen, for making these museum moments possible. Today is Giving Tuesday. So what better day than to drop a little bread over at jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. You can find that Donate Now button there. On Thursday, we're going to take this bread, keep the bread line going, and we're going to be talking about Jewish bakeries in Milwaukee. So join me again then, and thanks for sharing this moment with me.